today's the 21st. Okay, Friday's the 23rd. Monday the 26th, I will give a semester review, which is everything that we've done. It'll take every minute of the class. If you've never been here before, you've got to be here then. You got to watch the YouTube. You got to take pictures. On Wednesday, we will have a practice midterm. On Friday, we'll go over that practice midterm. And then on Monday, October the 3rd, we will have the midterm. Now, we're supposed to be in the other room this week. I don't think we'll make it. But because I let you look at the YouTubes, because I let you look at your phone, because I give open note tests, because I give hard tests, you need to look at your notes. It's hard to do that in here in 50 minutes. All right? There's nowhere for you to spread out and take the test. So the first class unanimously voted to take the midterm virtual. Well, here's the deal. On Monday, October 3rd, I will post the midterm at 9 o'clock in the morning. You have to get it back to me by email in 24 hours. All right. Form of business. Basic business equation. Ethics. Management. And some aspects of law, which were contracts, torts, and property. And you should have all of that on your cheat sheet. Huh? Okay, we did criminal, but I'm going to do property today. Thank you. Property in business law takes about a week, and here we're going to do it in 15 minutes. There are two types of property, real and personal. Real property is land, is your house, is a building, and real property transaction, a grantor, who's the seller, gives a deed to a grantee, who's the buyer. Okay? I don't think I would count off if you use the word seller and buyer, but I would give you points if you use the words grantee and grantor. Remember, I grade backwards, so I add points rather than taking them off. A mortgage is where the grantee gets the money. The grantee gives a mortgage to the bank. Now, on the deed and on the mortgage, there's a bunch of legal stuff, a bunch of legal words. And then in the middle of the deed is a paragraph that's cut back. And inside that paragraph, on the deed and on the mortgage, is what's called a property description. Property description sounds very simple. I mean, it sounds like an address, but it's not. Property description is a legal business word that describes the property, 1 mile from 35.2 minutes and 36.2 seconds to down to the old crooked tree, and then 3 miles south to 40 degrees west, and it uses GPS coordinates, and it describes the property. Well, the reason why a property description is so important is if your boss sends you out to say, I want you to find me 100 acres to build a warehouse, and you go out and say, I found the perfect 100 acres, it's $1,000 an acre, and it's going to be great for the warehouse, And so you buy it, and then the surveyor goes out there and he surveys the property to build a warehouse, and they find out it's only 99 acres. And somewhere in the past, somebody cut off an acre, and you paid for 100, you didn't get but 99. Well, the property description has to be the same for 70 years. And when you buy a piece of property, your lawyer goes to the courthouse or uses the internet to check every time that piece of property was bought and sold. Every time. So you look through there, and I bought it from Edwin 10 years ago, and the property description is the same. Edwin bought it from Tristan 20 years ago, and the property was the same. And Tristan bought it from Bobby 5 years before that, and it was different. The property description was different. So you find a deed that's in the chain that's off. It's different. And when that happens, you don't panic, but it takes a couple of months for the lawyers to fix it. All right? Sometimes you got to go find a retired lawyer. Sometimes you got to find Bobby and say, okay, yeah, I'll sign a quitclaim deed to give you the extra acre. It's looking for people to try to fix that property description. I have no idea why it's 70 years. And it could have been 65, it could have been 100. For some reason, they picked 70. Yeah.
So does it have to be 70 before you can change it again, or is it always going to be 70 and then another 70?
It has to be 70 going back to know what you're buying. Okay. Now, if let's say there's 100 acres for sale, and you go 70 years back, and you find that 100 acres is true, that the property description has never sold, but you're only buying 50 of it. So you can buy 50 acres of that 100, and your property description is going to describe 50 acres, and then from now on, anytime anybody checks that deed, they're going to go back and say, well, here's where it was split. And then before this, it was 100. Okay? And this is a particularly big deal in South Carolina, right? Because my son-in-law's family lives in Mount Pleasant in the Charleston area, and they have property that their family got in 1670. Okay? Now that's not old to you guys, but in America that's old. And so when you go looking at a deed that started out 14,000 acres in 1700, and you've got to narrow it down to 100 acres, what was sold, what was bought, what's underwater, where they got a bridge now or a road now. It would just about be impossible if you had to do that in the low country of South Carolina, because that land came from King George, and somebody would receive 40,000 acres, and you'd have to narrow it down to find your 100. And so 70 acres makes sense in that aspect of it. Why the property description would need to be proper for the person buying the property? He wants to make sure what he's buying. Who else is worried about this property description? Somebody said it. Huh? The bank. The person that gives the mortgage. Right? The bank gives somebody, $100,000. You're going to pay them $1,000 a month at 5% for 30 years, and after 15 years, you get divorced, and you tell the bank the house is yours. Come get the keys. Bank doesn't want the house. Bank wants their money. And when my son was your age, he started flipping houses by going to houses that were foreclosed and then going to the bank and saying, I'll buy the house since you don't want it. Because banks do not want to own real estate. They want money. So when they get the real estate, they want to make real sure that they're getting their property, right? They don't want to lend $100,000 to somebody buying 2 acres in a subdivision, and then when they foreclose, they go look at the property and find out somebody gave half of it to their brother, who built another house on it. So the bank is concerned about the property description, and the buyer, the grantee, is concerned about the property description. Any questions on simple real estate? Personal property, your watch, your necklace, your clothes. But it's also your company's 100 trucks. It's your company's 10,000 machines. It's Elon Musk's space rocket. That's all personal property. Anything that's not on the ground is personal property. So for business purposes, you can't just think about your watch and your necklace. You've got to think big. Anything that's not on the deed that the business owns is personal. Personal property, you have to have 3 things. And I like to use 3 things, as you know. You have to have ownership, possession, and title. It's like a contract that has offer, acceptance, and consideration. You have to have all 3. Now, the way this would work, let's say you bought the furniture. Newberry College has bought the furniture to go in the other classroom in the Con Auditorium, and they've paid for it. Okay, so they have ownership. And the company that sold the furniture, sent them paperwork saying, here's your paperwork, here's your receipt for what you paid. So they have the title. But they don't have possession. Possession is still on the truck. Now, there's a truck out there right now on Evans Street, but it's not inside the building yet. You have to have all 3 to have it. And usually what happens is it may be you've had ownership and you've paid China for a boat full of whatever, boat full of these, okay, boat full of markers, 2 billion markers. And you've got a receipt for it and you've got the title, but the possession, it's sitting in the Charleston Harbor. If you've ever been to Charleston, it's stacked up in the big metal containers. And the harbor master won't release it until the harbor has been paid for storing it. So it's got to be picked up, put on an 18-wheeler, and driven up I-26 to Newberry. And instead, it sits at the Charleston Harbor stacked up with other things. And I was told recently there are 4 boats outside of Charleston at the 2-mile range just sitting there. They don't have anywhere to put the stuff because the supply chain is so slow. I had a former student call me or send me a text last night and woke me up about 10 o'clock. wanting to know what to do. He had bought a used car. Okay? He had the car, so he had the car. He had possession of the car. He'd been driving it. But he had bought it from the used car dealer 2 or 3 months ago, and he didn't have the title. He couldn't get the tag because he didn't have title. Well, used car dealers go to auctions, and you know, those 18-wheelers that pull those big racks that they stack the cars up on. Okay, you see those on the interstate. Well, the used car dealer is selling those things as fast as he can get there, but a lot of those cars have been in wrecks, they're stolen, they don't have titles. So you go buy it from a used car dealer and say, well, I need to get my title. And they say, oh, we'll get it. It's in the mail. The auction guy is sending it to me, and as soon as I get it, I'll let you know. And you never get a title. So then you got to go to DMV and do a lost title application, and it's just a pain in the butt. So sometimes you got one, sometimes you got two, but you got to have all three to have personal property. I got that picture in. It'll be on YouTube too. This is a little mini review. Y'all, it's time to go. Just tell me, okay? Forms of business, partnership, corporation, 5 decision makers. What are they? Capital, control, fees, taxes, and liability. Business equation, profit equals revenue minus expenses. Ethics, religious, moral, situation. Management. SWOT, strategic, situation. Contract, offer, acceptance, consideration, which is value. Torts, negligence equals duty that is breached, resulting in injury, but the duty has to be reasonable. The injury has to be foreseeable. All right, we just did property. Don't worry about crime for this midterm. Okay? So contracts, torts, property, which is over on the other side of the board. All right, now way to make a 4.0 in college is sit down with your roommate, sit down in the caf, and say, what do you think Dr. Blojo is going to put on his exam? And try to figure out, try to put yourself, what would you test? What did we go over a lot? What did we test? What are the connections? Well, in here, if you do forms of business, well, then you got to do basic business equation. If you form a business, a corporation or a partnership, to say this is also a basic business equation and that this business wants to make a profit, and in order to make a profit, they need revenues minus expenses. 2 or 3 sentences. So when you start checking it off for your test, and you check off form of business, well, you know, check off basic business, because they usually go together. Now, if I'm going to test you on torts, I'm going to give you a question having to do with somebody slipping and falling, you know, or football stadium stands fall down, or somebody choking on a Chick-fil-A. I mean, it does anything. If I'm going to test you on a tort, which is an injury to a person, what am I going to test you on? What do you have to make a decision on? What do you have to think about? Well, in the lawsuit, what I've got written right here, what do you have to think about? What's not a slam dunk, but something that has to be decided? Well, duty and a breach and an injury, I give that to you, you give it back to me. Okay? I mean, that's easy. What's negligence, duty, breach, injury? But reasonable and foreseeable requires you to think. Is it reasonable for somebody to have a duty to a third person? Is it reasonable for, it's reasonable for Newberry College to be responsible for the football stands if they fall in, but is it reasonable for Newberry College to be responsible for somebody that chokes on a Chick-fil-A sandwich that's being sold in the end zone? That's not as close a question. That's something you've got to discuss with me. Okay? So if I give you a fact where somebody is choking on a hot dog at the Clemson football game, and Clemson's got a duty to have the people sitting in the stands to be protected, but they choke on a hot dog during halftime, is that reasonable for Clemson University to be responsible for that person choking on the hot dog? Probably not. But it's something that I would test you on, because it requires you to think. It's more than just repeating back to me information. If they choke on the hot dog and their grandmother has a heart attack because they're worried about a kid choking on the hot dog, is that foreseeable? No, it's not foreseeable. It's something that has to be discussed. So look for, in the midterm, look for issues that make you think. Because I'm grading you, I'm going to, one of the questions is going to have forms of business on it. It always does. Then I may have one that's got management and contracts. I may have one that's got ethics and torts and contracts. I test you on your ability to pick the one that is. If you start writing about a form of business and I haven't asked you about them forming a form of business, then you're wasting your time. So the grade is on being able to pick them out, that I have taught you how to pick them out. And then the A paper is the one that discusses the places where you have to think. Have to think. All right, we on the same page?